Hello and a warm welcome to our other episode of Focus on This Week. This is a program that offers crucial and significant discussions with the purpose of influencing positive change in Tanzania, in Africa and in the world at large. Leading the program, as always, I'm your host, Caroline Maleo, and of course we'll be together from the beginning till the end of this program. Today on this episode, we'll discuss about Africa at COP30, Tanzania's role in climate progress. As we already know, this week, actually from the 10th of November until 21st of November, world leaders, different scientists, civil society organizations, and people that are involved in climate work are actually gathered in Belém, Brazil, to attend COP30, one of the major, remarkable and major important events in climate change in the world. And if we can recall, the world has had other COPs, like if you can recall, the world has had COP1 that took place in Berlin, Germany in 1995, but also has had COP2 in Geneva in 1996, COP3 in Japan in 1997. But as also, we have also seen recent COPs like COP28 that took place in Dubai in 2023. And we saw our president, Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, was able to attend that COP. But also the other recent COP was COP29, in 2024 in Baku, where the then Vice President, Dr. Philip Mpango, attended that COP. And if you can recall, Tanzania had signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992 and was able to ratify it in 1996. So Tanzania has been part of these previous COPs and is also part of this year's COP, which is COP30. According to the World Meteorological Organization, 2024 was seen to be the hottest year ever recorded. And the planet is now about 1.3 degrees Celsius, which is warmer than the pre-industrial levels, pushing us way closer to the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, which was set by the Paris Agreement. Scientists are warning that if we exceed these levels, parts of the world could face irreversible damages. Africa contributes to less than 4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. But still, statistics shows us that it suffers most with highest impact than even the countries that are contributing with higher percentage of polluting the greenhouse gas with their emissions. The African Development Bank also estimates that climate impacts already cost our continent between 5% and 15% of the gross domestic product annually. So this shows that this is a problem, and COP30 comes at the right time to tackle the issue of climate change in the continent. And here at home in Tanzania, Tanzania is not just participating in COP30, and you'll be able to hear more from my guests. Actually, the country right now is hosting the African Group of Negotiators on Climate Change. Now, let me not finish up all this information here at the studio to dive deeper on today's topic. I am joined with Ms. Clara Makenya, who is the head of the United Nations Environmental Program and also the focal point for Namibia. You're mostly welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
We're also having Igosha, Novatus Igosha, who is an advocate and an analyst as well. You're mostly welcome, Igosha.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Thank you so much. But we are also having Jocelyn Mirashi, who is a youth climate champion from WaterAid. I'm also humbly happy to have you in our program today.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
Well, people from home who are watching might be hearing about COP that is taking place for so many years. But what exactly is COP30, and why does it matter for Tanzania to be part of this conference? Take it, Clara.
Thank you very much, Caroline. So COP is Conference of Parties. And in this context, we are talking of COP30. It's the 30th Conference of Parties. Those countries that have been signatories that have committed or agreed to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So there are many other COPs. There is a COP, Conference of Party for Biodiversity. There is a Conference of Party for Desertification. So Conference of Parties for Climate Change is the so-called COP30 because it's the 30th Conference of Parties that is happening in Belém. And this is a global platform where world leaders, stakeholders, and different partners meet to discuss specifically on how to reduce emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, how to adapt, how to leverage and mobilize resources for climate financing. And they meet annually to assess the progress or to assess the need for maybe renewed commitments or new commitments, or the need to put rules and laws, that would support fast-tracking or accelerating the commitments that have been made. So basically, that is the Conference of Parties. And now this year is the 30th, which is happening in Belém. And they go actually by theme committing to delivery of Paris agreements.
Thank you so much, Clara, for that explanation. Jocelyn, to you, what do you understand by COP30 to add with what Clara has explained?
I think Madam Clara has explained it very well, but to add on that, on this perspective of youth, I think most of us were not born when COP1 started all the way to COP30. Personally, I have been following up since COP28, and I think this COP30 is really crucial for Tanzania because first, as you said, we host the African Group of Negotiators, but also last year COP29 was about climate finance, but this year is more about implementation. So it is really important for Tanzania to participate in this COP because this one is now about implementation. As you say, there have been different COPs and each one has been discussing a specific agenda, but COP30 is for implementation.
Thank you so much. Indeed, COP30 is for implementation. We'll come back to you to hear more on what the young people have to say regarding COP30. Now to you, Advocate Igosha. We actually understand that Tanzania currently is chairing the African Group of Negotiators on Climate Change. Politically, what does this leadership position mean and for our influence in the global arena?
That's a very good question. Number one, it shows that Tanzania's voice is not only the moral authority at home, but the diplomatic weight beyond our borders, and our interests in terms of climate security are also the interests of the larger African continent. Now, why are we participating as negotiators? It's because Tanzania has a diplomatic leverage, and through that diplomatic leverage, it creates a coalition of negotiations among these nations, and through that coalition of diplomatic negotiations, we can have diplomatic complaints, and out of diplomatic complaints, we might have bilateral agreements, and out of that bilateral agreements, we might come up with strategic demands. And second of all, through those strategic demands, Tanzania continues to be a signatory of the UNFCCC, which had given, which two legal instruments were born as far as the Kyoto Protocol 1995 and the Paris Agreements. And therefore, it gives us multilateral resilience to negotiate with the other larger nations that have a stake in this. But it gives us also what we call climate pragmatism, in which justice is a question of the voice of developing nations and those that are suffering directly, like island nations, for example, Vanuatu, Fiji, and other nations that are in the ocean. For example, right now, if you know that Indonesia is trying to transfer its capital, it's not a problem that the capital currently has a problem, but rising sea level is about to swallow part of that country. And therefore, under climate pragmatism, Tanzania continues to be the key voice, not only at home, but in Africa and to the larger international community.
Thank you so much, Igosha, for that explanation.
You're welcome.
Now, there's something that you mentioned about Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. Now we'll come to you, Clara. If we have had all these COPs from 1995 and we've had all these agreements, why are the temperatures still rising in the continent? Does it mean that the progress has been slow, or?
Yeah, you can say the progress has been slow, but there are many factors that contribute to emission reductions. So as we earlier on shared, as I shared earlier on, that the COP meet every year, to assess the implementation progress. So they commit, member states, countries commit to specific targets and goals. And their commitments do not just go in papers like that, but they have to go hand in hand with the resources, both technical and financial resources. There's a need for capacity to be able to implement the specific commitments that have been put to support reduced emissions. And of course, as you have correctly said earlier on, that African countries have contributed very little compared to what they are facing. So they're very vulnerable, much as they have not contributed that much to emissions. But both developing countries and developed countries, they have, they are put together, or there is what you call national determined contributions that come from different angles. And each country, including Tanzania, is putting its own commitments as to how they want to reduce emissions, okay? So the commitments that are put are actually dependent on a lot of other factors. And these factors are the ones either drag, delay, or accelerate the commitments.
Can I ask something with regard to what you have just explained? With what I read, amongst the countries that are the leaders in green gas, in emitting, destroying the ozone, the United States is one of them, and they have refused to attend COP30. Does it mean that the great emitters are avoiding their responsibility, or should this COP be, should the Africans actually go to the COP and actually demand that there has to be justice? Or?
That is it, but there was a platform that I also got where I said we need to go with a voice of ambition, not a voice of vulnerability. We are not vulnerable, of course we are vulnerable, but we need to go with a voice of ambition, knowing that we have a role to play. Much as we have been affected, much as we have been, really, the emissions has really costed a lot of, either economies, livelihoods, etc. We have a role to play, number one, as you have put it, in terms of calling for climate justice, but also in terms of coming with specific strategies, proposals, plans. From COP29, I know there was, the roadmap from Baku to Belém, which has clearly stipulated some specific plans to translate, the ambition, to translate the need to fast track, emission reduction. So this kind of roadmap, we have the role to play as Africa. And he has pointed out that, Tanzania is now the chair of the Africa Group of Negotiators. Yes. I had the honor to participate and attend, the preparations. And I could see that there is really that passion and ambition to see that Africa is also actually leading the way in terms of crafting, advising on solutions to fast track the emissions reductions.
Thank you so much, Clara. Let me just go to the young person here. Jocelyn, Clara explained that Africa is now accelerating the move. Do you think the young people are involved in this move?
Yes, because I will speak as a young Tanzanian that has been, like I said, this is my third COP. I think the Ministry of Environment in Tanzania has been very intentional about this because it allows us to be part of the delegation. We do not only attend COP as observers, but we get to be part of the delegation where we get to learn about negotiations, attend high-level events, and also get different global opportunities on different global platforms. But also, again, as now Tanzania is chairing the African Group of Negotiators, I also got an opportunity to be part of the preparations where the chairperson, Dr. Richard Muyungi, had a training for youth. And we also had our call, what we want to be negotiated as African youth. So I think Tanzania and Africa has been very intentional about this as a whole.
Thank you so much.
Let me to pick on that one.
Yes.
If you allow me. Actually, even the UN system is very proudly connecting itself to that, attributing the, the success of involving the youth. I remember in 2022, That is when the UN system in Tanzania worked very much closely with Dr. Muyungi, who is the advisor on climate change, and we together brought the youth in terms of preparation for, that was COP28, I believe. And I can say that we are seeing that partnership really yielding fruits and results, because youth are coming up very strongly and with you know, with an ambition as well, with a focus. So as she has correctly pointed out, that youth are not just observers, are not just learners, but they're actually contributors. And we are very proudly, you know, connecting ourselves and attributing ourselves to that success in Tanzania.
And can you tell us what is the works of UNEP in Tanzania in helping the country in protecting the climate in general?
Okay, so UNEP is addressing what we call 3 planetary crises. So there is pollution crisis, there is biodiversity loss, and there is climate change. And these are actually interconnected and interrelated. So when it comes to what we are doing in Tanzania, number one, we are a technical and science-based agency. So number one role for UNEP is really to create evidence, you know, supporting studies, assessments that will create the evidence and support or advise policymakers on the directions to take when it comes to climate change impacts and, you know, adaptation and mitigation. That is number one. But number two, UNEP also works very closely with partners in terms of now spearheading and amplifying the voices of the partners, including the youth. And that is where we are coming from when we engage with the youth. We want to ensure that, you know, youth voices are amplified. They actually also supported in terms of, you know, building their technical capacity to know how to engage accordingly, you know, when it comes to climate action. But also the other angle that UNEP works on is in terms of really translating policy to action. So we are supporting policy, we are supporting review of policies, we are working very closely with the government of Tanzania and other partners on the ground for policy review, for policy influence, but also translating policy to practice.
We'll come back and talk about that. Thank you so much, Clara, for that explanation. Now let's go to Advocate Igosha. Igosha, climate change is now deeply tied to economic diplomacy, as you explained earlier on. How can Tanzania now leverage COP30 outcomes to attract investment in renewable energy, sustainable tourism, and agriculture in general in the country?
Okay, to start with, it has come to the conclusion of the world after the ICJ decision of July 2025, after the proposal of Vanuatu, that climate change is not only a scientific challenge and not only an economic issue, but it's also very much an existential threat to humankind and the rest of the fauna, flora, and fauna in that context. Now, to come back to the question, what can Tanzania do? I think we must go beyond the negotiation talks. We must be able to commit ourselves. And that commitment should be to integrate our budgeting and, of course, our legislation, but above all, our sectoral policies. And that should go hand in hand with Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, which requires nations to be transparent, at the same time to be accountable. And that accountability should also focus on the general environment as it connects to the economies of scale and the larger regional and global community. So given our stake in this, I think we must be also push new laws, but those laws should be significant in terms of implementation, not only to address the matters in terms of engaging in different forums like COP, but also practically doing the thing at home. In other words, walking the walk.
Walking the walk. I will come back to you, Jocelyn, and ask you something regarding the youth, but I want to hear something from you, Clara, with regard to what he explained. How significant and how important it is to accumulate, like to get finance for the climate projects in the nation, because with what I read, it's like COP30, there's also that voice that has been raised to collect funds. How important are the funds in the developing countries?
Yeah, I shared earlier on that all these commitments, pledges, you know, ambitions, they cannot be realized without finance, right? So there is a need for that passion, there is a need for ambition, but there is a need for the resources. And it goes beyond financial resources, it goes to, you know, technical resources. But all these come together to, you know, at the center of it all is really finance. And you have correctly pointed out that now there is a call for, you know, raising $1.3 trillion a year until, what, 2035, right? And it's not coming from the blue. It's coming from the actual analysis of what is there. What is it exactly that is needed? We need capacities, okay. We need technologies, okay. We need, you know, infrastructure. So you can see all these angles bring together the significance of the finance that is needed for emission reduction, but also for adaptation.
Thank you so much, Clara, for that explanation. Jocelyn, do you think if these funds will be successfully collected, will they be able to channel to the young people?
I do believe that. But as Madam Clara said, before channeling these funds, there has to be some sort of capacity building. Because in my observation, when it comes to climate change, a lot of African youth do not have the knowledge on what is really going on, what should be discussed, and how climate crisis should be tackled. So I think it is really important and necessary to channel funds into capacity building and training and giving the knowledge on the situation of Africa or specific countries like Tanzania as a whole. What we need to demand, what we need to do, and how we should tackle the climate crisis. Because climate crisis also differs with regions. There are regions that are facing excessive heat, there are regions that are facing flood. So I think also these capacity buildings should be tailored to specific regions.
And who should capacitate these young people?
Again, I think that should be a partnership with entities like the UN, the government itself, maybe implement a certain curriculum in schools so that children can learn this as early as now. Because for some of us, we came across climate change and environment as something as we have grown up. But I think if this is something that children grow up with, it could be really, it is really necessary, but it could also put some sort of, you know, not fear, but because climate crisis is not something in the future. Climate crisis is happening now. So it could be form of knowledge, yes. And after that, when they have been trained, then they can know now how to use the funds.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for that explanation. And I'm curious to understand, what would climate justice mean to the young people?
Climate justice is really necessary to young people because, as I always tell people, we do not have another Earth. We only have this one. So if we don't take care of it, and the biggest threat right now when it comes to the Earth is climate crisis. So we need to demand climate justice so that we can take care of this Earth, do necessary repercussions, take the necessary steps in places that have been faced maybe with deforestation in order to preserve the Earth or the continent for generations to come.
Indeed, in order to preserve our continent for generations to come. Thank you so much for that explanation. Now let me go to you, Advocate Igosha. Scientists are warning that Mount Kilimanjaro, which is Tanzania's pride and Africa's rooftop, has lost over 80% of the ice, the glacier, for over the cover since 1912. And if the current warming trends continues, the remaining glaciers could even disappear. What does this tell us about the urgency of climate action?
Number one, to be very specific, in as much as climate issue is real, I still believe that nature is a master of itself and nature will balance itself. Sometimes when you travel to Kilimanjaro, it's always on top there. It's always beautiful, it's always shining. Now, what can countries do to tackle this challenge? As Madame Clara has explained a lot of things, one of the key elements she touched on was financing. I do believe climate mitigation is a two-way traffic for countries like us, but it's very important for those nations with financial power, for those nations with diplomatic weight to come in also to champion climate issue. Now, countries like the US, of course, they've been denying climate change. I'm not saying the whole American population, but specifically Donald Trump. So I do believe that his voice would matter in order to mitigate climate issues, but other stakeholders like the United Nations and other key players should also come and work together and build capacity at home. Because people who live near the mountains are not the rest of the world. They are Tanzanians. So we would appreciate that kind of technical integration, would be able to see sort of cooperation that could build really results at home in order not only to save the mountain, but to save flora and fauna around the mountain, and of course to preserve our symbolic symbol of tourism in the peak of Africa.
Thank you so much. When Igosha was explaining, there was something that came into my mind. How fair is the global climate response when those who pollute the most, like the country like the United States, China and other countries, they're not getting the highest consequences, but countries like Tanzania face most devastating consequences. This is not fair. What do you have to say on this?
Yeah, it's true. It's not fair. And it's true, we find ourselves in a position of vulnerability as African countries. But it's also true that we have a role to play. We are strong enough, we are powerful enough as Africa to be able to convince, to be able to build the case, to be able to bring the traction, even for those who are polluters, to contribute and also to, to be responsible for their mission. So we need, again, I would like to repeat that we need, again, to come from the angle of influencing change and knowing that we're also part of that particular change, rather than angle of vulnerability and feeling like we don't have we cannot do anything. And of course, sometimes I feel, and I like the point that Jocelyn raised, that, sometimes these things, they could be coming from the angle of ignorance, ignorance. I mean, when you tell people about, emission reductions, responsible industrialization, they're like, oh, does it mean that we cannot move as fast as we want to? Like those developed world, they would have major maybe programs, initiatives, projects that they feel if I commit to this, you gave an example of countries like the US or whatever, they feel like, oh, this is going to drag us and we want to continue being the superpower, the super world power. So coming from the position of understanding how, nations, both developed and developing nations, can equally contribute, or not equally, because there are those who are polluting more than the others, but a position of equity, and seeing how they can contribute accordingly, how they can be responsible accordingly. It also demands, more, I would say more understanding, more conviction, So I believe sometimes the state of ignorance costs nations, and I wanted to point the point that Jocelyn pointed in terms of, starting from the very young age. Now imagine very young age from those, developed world like, America, India, China. And children go to school and they see, oh, this is a real situation. These are the scenarios coming from the climate change. We are seeing floods, even as developed as Japan is, there were some very devastating floods you saw from the media. So they see, and this is really climate change. It affects all of us, whether it's developed, yes, landslides, whether it's developed world or developing world, eventually it will catch up with all of us. Now maybe we're in position of vulnerability, but it might catch up with everybody else. whether you're developed or not. If you see the floods, was it, I don't remember which year exactly, that happened in Japan, right? Where you would see cars, literally cars. Was it Japan?
Japan in 2011.
Yes, that, you know, cars were literally, you know, pulled over with water. You know, builds broken, infrastructure really broken. And that is a developed world, you know. So eventually it catches up with the rest of the world. So it's not just, you know, it's not just like we are vulnerable as the Africans and, you know, we are developed, we are good, we are okay. It's about the understanding and removing that ignorance that, you know, eventually, you know, the climate change perils might catch up with all of us. So the point that she raised in terms of bringing that understanding to young children, you know, when they just go to school and they realize and they know we're actually facing a crisis, and it's actually a global crisis. It's not just a crisis to developing world. It's not just a crisis to those vulnerable communities because we have the infrastructure we have. No, it's a crisis that will catch up and can catch up with each one of us in the world. Once they have that understanding, then they will grow responsibly. You know, they will grow knowing that we have a role to play. No matter what, we have to be, you know, on that particular table to discuss, to dialogue and see how we can move the world to a safer place.
Thank you so much, Clara, for that explanation. Everyone has a role to play, not just the developed countries, but also the developing countries. To you, Jocelyn, how can government and development partners now better integrate youth innovation into the national climate plans?
Personally, I think I think as Madam Clara said, because I have worked with her, the UN entities have been very forward and very supporting of youth-led non-governmental organizations, NGO, whereas now the government should come in with policies, but also technical and financial support from our other partners and agencies like UN, WaterAid, who I work with, and other global partners to collaborate directly with youth-led NGOs that work with communities in the grassroots. Because most of, let's say, government officials or these development entities, they don't really know what's happening in the grassroots. It is us that live in the communities that see in the front lines the damage that the climate crisis has caused. And the climate crisis does not only cause damage when it comes to maybe, let's say, droughts and floods. It also contributes to disputes in a well-being of a person. For example, in some regions here in Tanzania, there are children who don't go to school because of climate change. Instead of going to school, they have to go long distances in pursuit for water or to graze cattle. So I think it is very important for both government and other global entities to partner with youth-led organizations who, not only youth-led organizations, but youth-led organizations that work in the communities, in the grassroots. And I think this will be very helpful in helping the run for climate justice, because we do not have time, like you have stated.
It's urgent.
It's urgent. So I think there should be ways to bridge or to bring together the community, the government and other entities, and this bridge could be youth-led organizations or youth-led initiatives.
Thank you so much. And if I can state clearly, you work with WaterAid. Can you tell us the works you do with climate change as a young person?
One of the things that I have been working with WaterAid throughout this year. WaterAid brought about 18 young people from all over the world, and one of the biggest thing we have been working on this year is writing an open letter that we're going to deliver to COP30, asking world leaders and other entities like the UN to take water crisis in the midst of climate crisis. Because water crisis is not talked about enough, but it is the climate crisis. When you talk of climate crisis, 80–70% you talk about the water crisis. And working with WaterAid, I have come to realize that the water crisis is really another urgent issue because the statistics say 1 out of 10 people doesn't have access to clean water. So on top of that, add on the climate crisis. So the water crisis is not getting better, but it's getting worse. So it is also a crisis that needs to be addressed within the climate crisis. So one of the agendas that I will be pushing at COP30 is to advocate for water to be at the center of climate negotiations.
Thank you so much. Indeed, water should be integrated in that because it is a climate crisis as well. Yes. Thank you so much for that explanation. Now back to you, Clara. The UNEP emissions gap report, it shows that current global pledges still lead a 2.8 degrees Celsius rise by the end of the century. Far above the 1.5 degrees target from the Paris Agreement. What urgent measures should be prioritized at COP30 now to close this gap?
I would go back to the what was called the Baku to Belém roadmap. There are 5 R's that have been, mentioned in that Baku to Belém roadmap. R number 1 is replenishing grants and concessional, finance. Finance has been an issue, and there is a second R, which is talking of rebalancing, the fiscal situation with the sustainability, debt sustainability. So balancing the fiscal condition and sustainable debts. The third R that I think is also, is relevant from those 5 R's is they're talking of rebalancing, I believe rebalancing the systems and the structures to have equitable sort of, climate, balancing the systems and structures that would bring equity, that will bring justice. That is what they talk about in that rebalancing R. I believe I'm not mixing the R's. And then there's another R that is talking of, bringing on board the private sector. No, I think the rebalancing is the one that is bringing the private sector. And then there is reshaping that brings about the issue of, balancing between, ensuring the equity, climate equity. So basically, okay, I might not be able to go through all of them there, but they're there. But basically, the roadmap, from Baku to Belém speaks it all, in terms of really addressing the emission gaps. Because actually the report is saying, even if, the NDCs are pursued and they really are implemented, still will be beyond, the 1.5 degrees limit in the next decade, So even if we tighten our belt very well, we'll still be beyond 1.5 degrees. So which means that there is that urgency, but there's a need to continue looking at how we implement on the commitments. We don't just end on commitment, but we really look to pursue the commitments as member states. Yeah.
Now, with what you explained, Clara, now to you, Igosha. She explained about implementing the commitments that are set on COPs, not just that we have the commitments and we do not implement. How do we make sure, as an analyst, how do we make sure that there are targets that will be put on COP30? How do we make sure that we actually work the talk, as you explained earlier on?
Like aforementioned, I do believe that it's imperative that countries integrate whatever they decide at COP in their national economic entity in terms of legislation and, of course, budgeting and sectoral policy. However, it's also crucial nations realize that development can coexist well with the climate change matter. So sometimes certain nations do not want to commit themselves because they think that they might be pushed to cut down industrialization and other economic entities like that. But I think implementation can also be bridged by legal instruments. And as of today, the United Nations has reached 80 years. And I think it's one of the most important forums to push the so-called responsibility to protect. And I'd like also to congratulate the decisions of the ICJ, which has come out in July, as far as those obligations of nations to commit themselves. And therefore, the only way to move forward, like Madam Clara had said, it's the question of pursuing those commitments. And how do you pursue that? You pursue that by having legal instruments that you can stand for. At the same time, you try to bridge those legal instruments with international instruments like the Paris Agreement, the Tokyo Protocol, and of course, how you mitigate the recent ICJ decisions. At the end of the day, whether developing country or highly developed nation, we are all mankind, and this small planet, as my young sister said, is the only place that we can be able to take care in order to have generational success.
Thank you so much, Igosha, for that explanation. Well, you explained about pursuing the commitments. Now back to you, Madam Clara. Let's address the big elephant that we've already talked about, but I want us to talk about this again. President Donald Trump, when he got into power, we saw the things that he did with UNAIDS and other things that he actually did. Do you think his recent decision now that he said that United States is not going to be part of the climate conference, do you think that his decision will affect the goals of COP30 by America, a big nation, not being part of the COP?
Of course, it will. Just as we said, all of us, including yourself, I mean, it's a partnership. And, you know, it's like when you're in marriage, it's not just a husband who is responsible for making that marriage work. It's not just the wife that is responsible for making that marriage work. So obviously, when one part of that partnership is not really contributing, coming forth, obviously it will affect. And of course, we all know that America is a big, you know, powerful nation with resources, you know, so obviously not being part of the process, not being part of the negotiations, not being part and not coming forth in terms of committing, you know, committing to what, you know, world leaders would commit to, would obviously leave some sort of a gap. But that does not stop, you know, the world nations, the world leaders to see and pursue what can be done. It's actually a wake-up call. You know, it's a wake-up call that we need to move forward with focus and with one voice. You know, the world leaders that are there, the world leaders that are committed to, you know, to really reducing the emission, you know, the emissions, but also to support with adaptation. You know, the world leaders that are looking at how they can, you know, scale up the finance. We need to come forth understanding that, you know, the journey continues, you know. We will not be stopped by, you know, nations or, you know, some, you know.
Because the U.S. has,
because
then we
the
shouldn't
US,
move.
No. I think we need to move forward together. And I always come back to the angle of, you know, maybe there is a need for more enlightening. Sometimes I like to feel like sometimes, you know, sometimes there's a need for that. Jocelyn mentioned that when you go to the ground and see the damage caused by climate change, you know, seeing those children that need to go to school, but they can't because they have to fetch, you know, water and firewood, when they need to go to school, but they can't, maybe because of a certain flood, you know, landslide, you know, across Africa or in other parts of the world, in Asia. I believe when that first-hand experience and the eyes to see can change, you know, some people's minds can change, maybe Donald Trump's mind. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So sometimes it's coming from the angle of what have you seen? How are you enlightened on that particular matter? you know. So there's still room to support with evidence, but there's also more room to bring to the ground, to bring the actual picture to the world leaders, you know, even those who are committing, because there are those world leaders and the developed world that is committing, has been committing, you know, to climate finance, for example, but it has never been met. It's only 2022 that, you know, there was that, you know, meeting of the $100 billion, you know, commitment, and still even with that, the amount that was there is not just from the grants, it's also on the loans, you understand? Mm-hmm. So I believe coming all the way to the ground, seeing, I wish one day we have COP in one of the African countries.
Yes,
you know,
and I read there was a
know,
COP that took in Nairobi.
I mean, there was in Egypt. It was in Egypt, Nairobi, but not just remaining at the.
Why not Tanzania?
Not just remaining at the metropolitan parts, the cities, you know, where we are at Hayat Regency. No, go all the way to Singida and see how, you know, drought has stricken us. Go all the way to those remote areas of Ethiopia, South Africa. I know there has been COPs that have been, you know, conducted in Africa, but do we have those opportunities where world leaders will go and see first-hand experience of the impacts of climate change? The field visits attached to the COPs, right?
Thank you so much for that explanation.
If I can add something to what Madam Clara said. Yes. I think one of the reasons Brazil is having COP in Belém this year and not Rio or Sao Paulo is to see firsthand the results of climate crisis near the Amazon. I can hear from people who have already been there that it's extremely hot. So I think one of the reasons Brazil is not hosting it in one of its big cities is so that people who are attending COP30 can see firsthand what climate change has done to areas like Belém.
So we are getting there. It's good. We are getting there.
We are getting there. And Jocelyn, can you tell us, what is your message as a young person and as young people to the world leaders who are attending COP30? What is it that you want the leaders not to miss out regarding the young people?
My biggest message will be to now turn these negotiations or pledges into action, because there has been so many of them. Like we have pointed out, there has been pledges and negotiations from COP1. We're now in COP30. So it's time for these pledges. Pledges are good. I'm not saying pledges are bad. Pledges are good. There's some form of commitment, but it's now high time that these pledges are turned into funding, you know, into technology, even into capacity building and other forms of, you know, service which can help fight the climate crisis.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for that explanation. To you, Mama Clara, can you tell us what message do you want to tell the leaders that are attending COP30?
Yeah, so I would say we have the data. We have the reports coming, you know, periodically from all angles. We just received the emission gap report. We have the data. We have the science. We know what is happening out there. Actually, I can even say that we have the solutions as well. But I think we need to merge all this with the resources, technical and financial resources. And I think the biggest gap that has been there, or the biggest sort of, you know, ambition that comes forth, is beyond the knowledge, beyond the science, because they are all there. But we need to, as Jocelyn has pointed out, to move into action. And moving into action, that is where we need to unlock the climate finance.
Are the leaders ready to move to action?
I hope this COP will bring positive results with the 5 Rs. Let's be optimistic. I was listening to Prince William, who was talking of urgency, optimism. Urgency optimism. So let's move with that urgency optimism, you know, urgent optimism, knowing that hopefully this time around with the, you know, with the Baku to Belém roadmap, something might happen to unlock the financing. And I think it's very important also for the world leaders, for the nations, to prove to the world to partners, including the private sectors, that they can actually engage. Because the private sector, the investment, those who want to invest are out there. They are watching. Because for them, it's actually profit making. So they are watching. They are ready to engage on green bonds. They are ready to engage on, decarbonization. But would it really bring any profit? So they are watching. So the commitments will determine the engagement of all these private sector as well. So my message is really to see that we are able to unlock all that it takes for the science that has come forth, for the reports, out of the reports that we have received, and the ambitions, the targets and goals that we have put, that they come to be realized.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Clara, for that explanation. Indeed, we have to put into practice to make sure that whatever it is that the countries will come up with, they come to action. To you, Igosha, what is your message to the leaders that are attending COP30?
I've got 3 points to give as a message. Number 1 is multilateralism resilience, to mean that in this world, of course, certain countries' participation is significant, but it's not the only voice. And therefore, as far as the rest of the world has already shown commitment in terms of going to COPs and in terms of legal instruments, they still need to continue to push that agenda ahead, regardless of what is happening on the ground. Number 2, climate pragmatism. We should be flexible enough to educate our people, flexible enough to change policies at home, and do it by having sometimes a radical implementation of decisions. And thirdly, is what I call sustainable sovereignty. And therefore, a nation must go there to know that it has a stake for its own existence, its own generational continuity, its own economic diplomacy, but in the larger basket of international relations. And that kind of sustainable sovereignty also means that as far as you have the laws, as far as you have got the vision, for example, in Tanzania, Vision 2050, there was always a possibility of that coming to the manifestations of environment and coexisting between what is to be done with the economy, at the same time, the climate itself. That could be my key points.
Thank you so much, Igosha, for the key points that you have provided. But I want to ask you, how can Tanzania balance the development needs now with the commitments that will be made under COP30?
Well, there could be alternative energy sources. We've got the sun here, so I believe that investment in solar energy and, of course, renewable, for example, green energy as well. And therefore, the only way to balance is to know that we must continue to have investors' confidence. And this investors' confidence comes into how we implement international instruments as well. As far as, for example, Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, and of course, Article 4. If you have transparency and agreement, the UN could trust you, and other international stakeholders, they could continue to come and invest here as far as other renewable energies. And how you balance that is also a question of who you take to the parliament. The representation, the voice should reflect the agility in terms of the vision.
Thank you so much, Igosha, for that explanation.
Thank you.
To you, Jocelyn, can you tell us, now you have given your views, your message to the leaders that are attending COP, but what do you think is the young people's role now in implementing whatever it is that will be agreed on COP30?
One of the things the young people should do now is to form partnerships. Like I said, nothing works without partnerships. Partnership with the government, with entities like the UN and other entities, but also partnership among ourselves. Because if we don't have partnerships or agreements among ourselves, you can find 3 people doing the same thing. But if we come together and, you know, collect the data, have the capacity building, it would be even easier to access funds as a group, despite being individual, like asking for funds as an individual person. So I think what I should advise the youth is, one, form partnerships, but also learn. I think attending COPs or following up on COPs, you don't necessarily have to attend to understand what's going on. Following up on COPs, we learn new things every day. There are new laws, there are new position papers, we have NDCs. So I think not only Tanzanian youth, but youth everywhere should just be passionate about finding the information and learning on the position of their countries and their communities, or even the continent as a whole. I think this is key information that in order to combat climate crisis, every young person, or it could even be simplified to every child, to have this knowledge in order to, you know, accelerate combating climate crisis.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for that explanation. Dear TBC One viewers, the program on air was focused on this week, and today we discussed about Africa at COP30, Tanzania's role in climate progress. And here at the studio, I was with Clara Makenya, who is the head of UNEP Tanzania, but also a focal point for Namibia. But I was also with Novatus Igosha, who is an advocate, but also an analyst. I was also with Jocelyn Mirashi, who is a youth advocate for climate change from WaterAid. I'm really happy to have had you, and thank you so much for all the contributions that you have provided. TBC One viewers, as Tanzania takes part in COP30 in Belém, Brazil, one message is clear, that climate change is no longer a distant threat, but it is here, and everyone has a role to play, as my guests here have explained. Both the developed countries, the developing countries, the youth, the leaders, the citizens. Everyone should play a role. Leading the program today, I was your host, Caroline Maleo. Until next time, bye-bye.